All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode. That's right, the London is Blue podcast. Hopefully, your favorite Chelsea podcast out there and a part of the Men in Blazers Media Network. If you hear my voice, it's Dan here. You know what that means. It is a match preview with the one, the only Sam CFC Central. And we're going to be getting you geared up, getting you prepared for Chelsea taking on Tottenham Hotspur in the midweek action to try and spoil their fun as they look to advance, as they look to try and see if they can grasp any last hope of a Champions League spot, as we look to grasp any last hope that we might be able to climb up the table. There's two teams here, Sam, that are both looking to try, I think, to punch above where their weight has been this season. And, if we think about where Chelsea were earlier in the season, the chaos of the last time these two sides faced each other, there's going to be some bad blood in this match. I think these are both going to be teams that, again, historically despise each other and are absolutely going to be out to try and prove something against the other team.
Absolutely, Dan. I think you've summed it up perfectly. I think it's hard to play second fiddle to another North London rival doing all sorts of good things. I mean, making the Champions League, knockout rounds, being there in title contention hasn't been easy for them, hasn't been easy for us. So good to see we've united over our common foe, but both clubs arguably not where they want to be. Spurs maybe a little bit happier with being in and around that fourth position, kind of guaranteeing Champions League football next season, having a manager who's had sort of like a galvanizing effect after Poch left and there was a lot of instability. But yeah, I think similar issues in many ways for both clubs, finding the identity, ensuring some kind of stable relationship with the fans, with the board, having a little bit of calm on the field, open attacking sort of play, and no respect given to defensive, attitude, and all sorts of goals being conceded from set pieces. So similar tales, but very different positions on the table. So it'll be interesting to see which one cracks first.
I think the other thing, because we won't get a chance to talk about it on a pod until we weren't going to get a chance to talk about it until this episode, was the fact that from the weekend to now, we did get the news that had been rumored or been a very open secret that Thiago Silva would be ending his tenure with Chelsea at the end of this season. Very emotional video drop that came through the club accounts and the players' accounts on social media. But just Sam, you put together some eloquent pieces on your Instagram post and on your Twitter post about it. But I think it's just crazy to me that we got Thiago Silva on a free, first of all, that we helped him and he was an integral part of us winning a second Champions League, and that we got to enjoy some really exceptional football from him at what pains me as someone who is 39 to say an advanced age in the sport of world football, and got some really absolute champagne performances out of him for the past few seasons. You had a lot of other thoughts though, just reflecting on it. How do you feel about Thiago Silva's time at Chelsea, and what are maybe some of the things that you just want to touch on as we start to say goodbye? I think we had already accepted that the goodbye was happening, but now it can be formalized with the news being released.
I find it quite mind blowing that when Frank Lampard scored those two goals at Bolton to seal our first title in a long, long time under Roman Abramovich. Thiago Silva was like a little known centre back, and he was essentially fighting for his life in a little hospital room all the way in Russia. And since then, both have come forward in leaps and bounds and achieved all kinds of successes. And yeah, in that post I mentioned, it's quite unfathomable for me to think that he's played more games for us than he has for AC Milan. So just gives you an incredible insight into the man, into uh, just the professional he is. Absolutely brilliant example for everybody at the club. we were supposed to have him for like a year, year and a half on his initial deal, and he stayed till he's 39. So, no better example of the ultimate professional. He's had his struggles, undoubtedly, but I don't think people understand how difficult it is to be a professional football player in the Premier League at his age, competing with athletes who are much quicker than you, their bodies are more durable than yours, but just how well he's recovered, just how well he's managed himself, and he's played a lot more minutes than he should have. He should have been a nice rotational presence, a leadership presence, but he's essentially played every single time in the time that he's been here with us. So just speaks of his influence in volumes, and I have nothing but the utmost respect. I think we're losing a big part, but like he said, it's not the end. And hopefully he'll be back in, some part of a backroom capacity very soon. He's doing his UEFA badges, and Cesc is doing his as well. So hopefully we'll get to see two Chelsea players back, helping us get back to our former glory.
Yeah, you wouldn't turn him down if he came up and said, I want to be involved in some type of coaching structure at Chelsea, some type of ambassadorial role through South America and Brazil, potentially helping scout. There's a lot of ways that you could put Thiago Silva to work for the future of Chelsea that most fans would be extremely appreciative of.
The defensive coaching setup, Dan, should be John Terry and Thiago Silva. End of it. Those two guys could
Love
basically,
it.
yeah, could teach a center back, you know, module at Harvard. Both of them ideally should have played together. That's a dream I will forever have in my head. But yeah, if you have them basically dictating how the defense is playing, oh my God, that would be an incredible way to do it. But like you said, multi-club model also on the horizon, maybe a club in Brazil also on our list of things to do. So if he can go there and convince people with his pull, with his respect and standing in the game, nothing like it. The perfect person to do it.
Well, I'm sure we'll get an opportunity over the remaining few matches to see some Thiago Silva and to give him a very final farewell. I know that the We Are the Shed group has a big display planned according to their the social media accounts. So very much looking forward to see how the Chelsea supporters who've not had a lot of good things or opportunity to show or shower the team with a lot of praise this season will get an opportunity to send him off in fine fashion. But we're going to get a quick bit of admin out of the way. Just say thanks to everybody who supports our amazing podcast community, leaves 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Always appreciated, free to do. And if you haven't done it yet, why not? Also, if you want to head over to YouTube, subscribe, hit the bell icon to get notified, and also like and comment on the videos. We appreciate and read those as well, the comments. And you also get our free weekly newsletter that Sam produces, the London is Blue Dispatch. Absolutely essential reading on a weekly basis. I do, this is going to come out on the same day as the newsletter, but if you're listening to this before you read it, spoilers, Thiago Silva might be mentioned once or twice. And then you also can get involved in our Discord community. There's a free and paid version. But we are going to be looking at Tottenham Hotspur. We're going to be looking at the team that is currently fifth in the Premier League table with a record of 18-6-8, currently on 60 points. That's 1.688 points per game. And their home record, really strong. I mean, I guess in terms of having double digit wins, 12-0-5. They have 36 points from home fixtures. Away record, a little bit more of a mixed bag. 6-6-4, 24 points in total. Their goals, 65. It's 2.03 per game. Their expected is 57.8, so a little overperformed there. Goals against, 49, and the expected goals allowed, 53.9. So defensively, a little more the beneficiary of luck, doing good work in terms of not conceding as many as they would expect. And if you look at some of the recent matches, the one that maybe people were hoping for at least a draw would have been the match at Tottenham versus Arsenal. It was a 3-2 thriller finish for that one this past Sunday, April 28th. But they did before that lose 4-0 to Newcastle. Before that, they beat up on Nottingham Forest 3-1. Before that, they drew 1-1 against West Ham. They survived against Luton Town, winning 2-1. They lost to Fulham 3-0. They beat Aston Villa 4-0. and then they beat Crystal Palace 3-1. That's from March 2nd all the way till now. They are such a whack-a-mole team, Sam. It almost feels like you don't know which version of Tottenham Hotspur is going to strut out on to the pitch on any given match week. And you might get the team that can go batter and bruise, or you get the team that just can't put it in the back of the net.
I'm sorry, are you describing Tottenham or us?
Maybe both. Are we looking in the mirror here?
Yeah, yeah, that Spider-Man meme. I completely like that's us. It's been a bit of, I think they've also benefited from a lot of good fortune. If you look at just their numbers, they should have conceded far more goals than they have, and that's been evident through the start of the season, where their pressing structure and a few things that the new manager bounce sort of nullified have taken a little bit of time before they've been exploited to their full degree. So I think they've reached that juncture now where teams are wise to what they do and they know just how to try and exploit that to the best of their ability, and that's where they've struggled. They've had some awful results, like you mentioned, just in the past few weeks. They've 4-0 to Newcastle. They were 3-0 down to Arsenal. I mean, I shouldn't be talking because, yeah, I just want to put that result at the back of my head. But not a good thing to do in a fiercely contested derby. So they managed to claw 2 goals back, just like we did against Villa, but obviously ended up losing that one. So a lot of pride at stake, and not going to be easy. And I would say that it's going to be strengths and weaknesses, sort of like you mentioned, just mirror images of each other. Both very good in attack, both very poor in defense. So it's just a matter of who strikes first and who's able to hold on till the end.
And I know we always play the game of how do we feel about the injury list. And no surprise, we have the injured 11 and they have a couple of players missing. So as you take a look at who is missing for this Tottenham side, anyone that you would highlight as being a major factor or major absence, other than maybe, potentially the ghost of Timo Werner with a doubtful flag here, being someone who just could absolutely on the day have some fun and score against Chelsea because why not? Kai Havertz did as well this season.
And especially for a game that I think or I predict it'll play out, he would have been the ideal player because we tend to be very defensively naive, and we don't have a right back if Malo Gusto isn't fit. So having your chance to run at a centre back from wide positions and being able to cause all sorts of havoc would have suited him. But I would say Brennan Johnson in place of Werner could also be quite the devastating player. So I think he might be a lot more dangerous than Werner, purely because of how quick he is and how good he is 1v1. Obviously, the finished product isn't there, but his numbers speak for themselves. So I would be cautious. I don't think Timo Werner is as big an absence that people think it is. I do think Destiny Udogie is, because the difference between him and Davies is quite significant, especially in defending phases, and even I would say like maybe what Udogi offers in those inverted positions. So Davis is quite good as well, but Udogi, the young guy who's still developing, becoming into a very, very good fullback and able to fit into what Postecoglou wants to do with his side, I think he's going to be a big miss. But other than that, I don't see any absentees that they would be too worried about. While I look at our list and I'm like, I wish I had that 11 genuinely, because that would have been a season changing factor for me.
Well, we will take a look at how they've been playing recently, that Tottenham that is, talk about how they've continued to find and get some good results, but also where those weaknesses are popping up across the pitch. But we're going to do that after our first ad break. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. All right, Sam, for those who have not watched Tottenham since the last time Chelsea played them, what would you like to say about how they have been performing and maybe just in general? I mean, Postecoglou's performance first season in the Premier League.
Well, I think they did have the best possible new manager bounce, because in the first third of the season, they were sitting atop. So in the reverse fixture, when they met us, they were actually top of the table. I think game week 8 to 11 stretch, they were top. So that's when we managed to go up against them, came away with a very, very good result. with the Nico Jackson hat trick. So yeah, I think Postecoglou has them playing a pretty expansive style that suits the profiles of the forwards that they have. Son, Brennan Johnson, Kulusevski, all very, very good attackers. Very nice 1v1, able to offer goals and assists both. So quite creative, quite intelligent attackers. Richarlison has also sort of chipped in and been a good presence. He had a great purple patch there, but all their attackers seem to be thriving in that particular system in how he's got them playing. I do think that their biggest threat is just central overloads and rotations. I think Tottenham, when you give them space in the center, when you allow them to switch up, is when they're at their most devastating. So, I mean, if people aren't aware of how Postecoglou wants his sides to play, it's essentially using inverted fullbacks. So instead of a right back playing along the channel or a left back staying close to the touchline, what both fullbacks do is they come narrow, almost like central midfielders. So it offers you almost, a four-man or five-man advantage in the center of the pitch. And this is made worse with the fact that you've also got inverted wingers who are left-footed on the right side and right-footed on the left side. So they, by design, like coming narrow. So it's a very narrow side. Um, you've got Son, who's, I wouldn't say a center forward, but he also likes dropping and drifting. So essentially, at one point, if you give them any kind of space and you don't get your tactics right, they're able to play through you quite easily. They've got technically sound players. They've also got players with vision who are able to pick passes neat under pressure. So that's going to be difficult. And I think just how quickly the fullbacks can go from being in the center to out wide, and the attackers can go from out wide to in, is what causes a lot of issues. And I think in build up when you're trying to press them, if you don't get your pressing structure right, it can fall apart. It can really, really damage you. And I would like to sort of point out what happened to us in the reverse fixture because we actually went one down. And we started with a 4-2-3-1. So Jackson was pressing the centre backs, the two centre backs, and the three behind him were on Spurs three players in their 2-3 build up. So each was marking one fullback as well as two other players. Madison dropped deep to help in build up, and Palmer was on Madison, essentially trying to keep him quiet. And both our midfielders, our central midfielders, Enzo and Caicedo, were in charge of being on one of the pivots as well as the inverted fullback in Udogi. And what that sort of created, because we had a man-to-man kind of system and we were trying to negate each player by staying on them, there was this space between Reece James and Cole Palmer, this pocket on either side of the DMs, because they were with a fullback and a central midfielder where any player could cause and drop and basically pick their passes. So Madison dropped from the number 10 position, and he was the guy who created the goal by dropping behind Palmer between Reece James and essentially playing a ball across to Saar, who was free, and that's where the goal came from. There were also multiple times that Brennan Johnson came away from Reece James, and Reece was a little hesitant to follow because Johnson is very quick. So he just kept taking the ball in that position and running at Reece, which is not something you want to see when you're going 1v1 against the defender. So that caused all sorts of problems. But we adjusted and we essentially were the beneficiaries of two sending offs. And but I would say that even with 11 versus 11, we were in the ascendancy before the sending off sort of impacted the game. But that's what happens with Spurs. If you allow them to manipulate you, and if you're not clear on which player is marking who, and if you don't hand over responsibilities properly, then there's every chance that they blow you away. So centrally, be compact and make sure that they don't allow you to do that. So that's what I would say is the strongest point, Dan.
Now, I know there's difference with the tactics in possession and out of possession too. And so, what are your thoughts about how they've continued to improve this season as relates to being comfortable playing with the ball? Again, didn't maybe change as many of their most important players as teams like Chelsea did. So there's a little more consistency from a roster standpoint than what we've seen. But it feels like there has been some beneficiary. Postecoglou has benefited from the fact that some of those key players are the ones that he inherited and had comfort playing with one another too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are, certain players who have basically benefited from him coming on and giving them the freedom to express themselves going forward. So it's a 2-3-5 mostly in attack, then in possession, and Spurs like to play with five in a single line against a back four or a back five against the opposition. Now the wide players can be the fullbacks, sometimes they can be the wingers, and the dynamics of it also change depending on who's playing where. So a lot of the times, for example, when the fullbacks are inverting, so let's just take Pedro Porro, for example, if he's coming inside, what he does is he occupies the half space, which is the space between the centre back, the opposition centre back, and the fullback, so that little channel. And that prevents your fullback from jumping out to the winger. So there's a direct ball out to whoever is on the right hand side. It's usually Kulusevski. Then there's every chance that your fullback is caught in two minds, because if he tries to go to Kulusevski, then Poro is open against your centre back for a crossing opportunity. And if the fullback goes, to Poro, then there's every chance that Kulusevski can make runs behind, and then try to basically get into the box. In that half space position, Poro will also threaten to run in behind what the term is an inseam run, so a run between the fullback and the centre back. So essentially, you see overlaps where you're going on the outside and trying to cross from a wide position. This is an underlap. So you go to the edge of the 18-yard box from where you can find more accurate cutbacks for the likes of Son. And that can be extremely dangerous. So when you look at their output, it's no surprise that obviously Son has remained quite potent with 16 goals. But then Kulusevski and Johnson have 6 and 5 respectively. Richarlison, like I said, has 10. He's also benefited. But it's the wide players from creative positions that have stood out. So Son has 9 because he tends to drift and drop and make all kinds of trouble there. But Johnson and Poro, two wide players in that front five, have 7 assists each. Then you've got James Madison, who has 7, which I should add is quite remarkable considering he has only 2 assists in his last 16 games in all competitions for Spurs. I should also add that he's obviously, everybody knows he's an excellent set piece taker. We haven't seen any bangers yet, but I'm hoping that we don't roll out the red carpet. So, yeah, one definitely to keep an eye out for. But it's a front line, like you see, it's quite potent in every attacking sense. But Madison's dip in form is also, I would say, related to how well other teams have read Spurs. They know that centrally you have to keep everything tight and quiet, and Madison's drop off in form is also related to exactly that, shutting off central spaces and forcing him to go wide. Um, the one other thing that I would like to mention is the pressing, which I think Postecoglou has sort of demanded from Spurs. It's a very aggressive, man-oriented system, which the shape is difficult to describe, but it's like a 4-1-3-2 or a diamond sort of shape, like an asymmetrical diamond. So against Arsenal, for example, what they did was they pushed um, the two players like Madison and Bentancur on the pivots, and Son was essentially in charge of pressing the centre backs and the goalkeeper. And from here, the shape is quite interesting because you've got both the wingers with like two responsibilities. You have to cut out the ball to the wide centre backs, but you also have to make sure that the ball doesn't go back to the fullback. So Spurs shape actually makes it quite difficult to play out from the back. But the caveat being, once you bypass that first line, then there's an ocean of space to attack in behind, because it's a 4-1 at the back. So you've got almost a flat four and just one DM covering all the space in the background, which is what Caicedo's been doing at times. So that guy is usually Yves Bissouma. He's had to, put out multiple fires in one transition and hasn't been able to do that, which is why they've conceded over and over again. And the centre backs, although good, have also come under all kinds of scrutiny. But this is what happens in the big games. Like the pressing is good. If they're aggressive, they're able to win the ball back and cause damage. But if it's not, then there was this one sort of moment against Arsenal where they were able to exploit, that press and get away from it over and over again. So, there's an opportunity there, but there's also risk from, playing out from the back. We haven't been able to do it very well, but it's a side that presses well, but presses with a high risk strategy, which reaps high rewards, but also gives you a high reward for getting past it.
So, as we switch gears to talk about things that they've been enjoying when they have possession with the ball and things that they have done well this season, we've given appropriate recognition and praise. Where is or where will Chelsea try to take advantage? Again, try being the operative word here of this side.
So I would say one thing that has consistently troubled Spurs is a low narrow block. So, like I mentioned, if you're able to keep a pretty compact shape centrally, if you're able to negate those spaces with a narrow shape, any shape. So Brentford tried a 5-3-2, which is that typical shape against big sides. But Newcastle did their 4-5-1, their 5-4-1. So very narrow, essentially closing all passing lanes in the center to Son, to Poro, to Udogi, whoever it is that's trying to find those spaces in between lines. And both times it worked. Brentford obviously threw it away because then they tried to press and become a lot more expansive and they got shredded. But Newcastle walked away with a clean sheet and 4 goals. So that tells you what works. Just try and close out the center, um, and make sure that the space between lines is minimal. So the optimal strategy would be somewhat what we did against Manchester City out of possession, which was basically have some dominant aerial players and prevent any kind of balls coming into the box, throwing our bodies on the line to prevent any kinds of shots. But the spaces in between, say Enzo Fernandez, Caicedo, Gallagher, and the last line were just minimal. Nobody could get past that and get a shot away. The one time they did, they scored through Rotary, but in most of the game we were very good at blocking anything that was from that area. So I would say that's one weakness. They struggle against that. They haven't figured out how to unlock a low block. The second I mentioned is like at the end of the strength section, just the man oriented press. It's very aggressive, but it does get bypassed. So against Arsenal, I mentioned there was this moment, and Madison tried to essentially nick the ball from Partey, and the ball was played from Raya to Partey. And when he pressed, Partey just basically spun him, and right in front of him was like the defensive midfielder and the back four, nothing else. So Partey just took, I think, 3 or 4 steps forward and played the ball wide to Saka, and Saka was 1v1 against Spurs left back, and that's the kind of situation that you want to be in. You want to be able to bypass that press, and from there it's just trying to get 1v1s and trying to attack by backpedaling defenders. That's where I think the advantage lies. I would also say like rest defense is quite bizarre and ineffectual. So the tendency to be very aggressive in attack is, I think, their Achilles heel. Very open at the back, and it's like I said, quite like our issues as well. So the double pivots with Spurs tend to have a very major responsibility throughout the side. They have to be good in possession. They have to be good out of possession, but like the slower players in the side, despite their on-ball value, like Pierre-Emile Højbjerg and Bentancur, like both of them have struggled out of possession. Newcastle, the first attack they mounted was through a transition, so they won the ball back at the edge of their own area, and they played Anthony Gordon down the right wing, and Gordon burnt Bentancur for pace. Like Bentancur couldn't even bother sprinting because he knew it was a lost case. So if you can manage those kind of situations against central midfielders, then there's every chance that you get some kind of leeway from there. So I would say those three weaknesses definitely stand out for me, Dan. But obviously a couple more because this isn't a side that's firm defensively.
Well, I think the others that you probably want to talk about ball retention, particularly with how they're trying to move the ball with the fullbacks and down the wings, but also, they have struggled with set pieces as well. I think those are the two other areas that if we're look again, we've not been a great set piece team either. So I don't know if we can necessarily take advantage of that one, but at least we can be aware that they are not the same type of team that we've played that maybe is a little stronger in that regard.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. So the first thing that I would like to point is arguably their biggest weakness, the standout weakness, and this happens in certain situations. So I mentioned the fullbacks like to invert and come central, and the wingers like to go wide to create issues. And when you win the ball back in these situations, that's when you can attack them down the wings. So transitions down the wings when Poro or whoever it is who plays at left back invert, that's the best and most devastating time to pick somebody out on the wing. And this has consistently been exploited by sides to great effect. If you watch Newcastle's goals, all four of them, like three of them, came through transitions. One was, like you mentioned, the other weakness, but the three of them came from long balls played from back to front to Anthony Gordon, the first one, the second to Isak or one of the other attackers who were essentially going up against three players at the back. So releasing players like Gordon down the wing, releasing any runners who are trying to carry on either side when Poro is committed up front, when Udogi is up front. Those are the spaces that can yield the best kind of results. We've got great speedsters in Mikhailo Mudryk, who didn't have the best game last time out. So hopefully this will be the perfect game to bounce back and show what he can actually do, because I think this game suits him well. Madueke also great in those situations, so that's where you would want to exploit them. I think Jackson also, just by virtue of how high a line it is that they also like to hold, every opportunity that you put him up against Van de Ven, and you get some kind of change from just playing direct to him. If you even make him chase, going towards the goal, and you have a Spurs defender running backwards, I think there's a good chance Nico causes trouble, and then we're able to transition from there. So I would say transitions, great way to get at Spurs more effectively when the fullbacks are occupied and out of the picture, and make them run make your wingers run 1v1 against their centre backs. The last thing, like you mentioned, is set pieces. So they've conceded nine from corners, which is an unholy amount. And yeah, Havertz scored a thumping header to make it three. And the first goal, I think, also, which was an own goal by Højbjerg, also came from a set piece routine. So could have been 10, but it's not a good number. They've struggled massively on corners. I was watching the Newcastle game to analyze this opponent, and Newcastle could have had five from set pieces, easy. From corners, they could have had four. Kraft hit the base of the post with a shot from a corner. There were missed headers that should have gone in from big centre backs, and I think there's every chance that you can utilize that. They're the fourth worst team in the Premier League with a aerial win rate of 48.3%. So except I would say maybe Romero, everybody else can be exploited. Everybody else. I wouldn't even say, near post, far post corners. Just put it on the head of someone like a Badia Shield or a Disasi if he plays, and there's every chance that you get a result. So one to watch out for would be corners of any kind from maybe Conor Gallagher or Mudryk.
Well, that is our deep dive on Spurs, what's working well for them, what isn't working well for them. But we're going to take our last ad break. When we get back, we're going to talk about how Chelsea are not going to be able to take advantage of some of the things that have worked well for other teams that have gotten a tune out of their time against the Spurs, and maybe what we can anticipate for Pochettino's, maybe one of his final matches at Chelsea. Who knows? But that's where the rumors are heading. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. So, Sam, as we take a look at how Pochettino and Chelsea will try to make do with the players that they have available, try to come up with a strategy that works, there are things that you've highlighted in terms of the weaknesses, ways that teams have taken advantage of this Spurs team. But I think you also want to just be the portend against the fact that we are not equipped necessarily at this point in the season with the players that we have available to emulate the exact same things that have worked for other teams in terms of getting a result against Spurs.
Absolutely. I think one thing that works effectively to neutralize or nullify their attacking prowess is going into a back five. And this is something both teams did. Newcastle did it, Arsenal did it, and both were able to get some rich dividends. And I'll tell you why. So what the back five does is, in very simple terms, it just matches Spurs' front five man to man. And this makes it easier to sort of cut out the balls that go to the 1v1 wingers. And when you're in a back five, then the winger opposite has to essentially beat the wing back as well as the wide centre back. So you have a 2v1 on the players out wide at all times. Now this is tough to do, Dan, if you're in a back four, because things work differently. So you're trying to be narrow against Spurs and trying to, essentially cut out space centrally. So you're conceding space out wide. So if anybody is able to switch the ball diagonally from one flank to the other, then there's only one winger versus one fullback. And it forces your wide midfielder, it's Madueke or Mudryk or Sterling, to drop and to double up to offer some kind of support to your fullback to make sure that he's not beaten 1v1. So a back five just naturally gives you added protection. It just also makes the center quite more compact. So it's easier for the wing back to push out and make sure that he's quickly getting to Kulusevski or whoever it is who plays out wide, and cutting out those opportunities for 1v1. So it would be nice to be able to do that. Newcastle did it in an interesting way. So they dropped their left eight, Anderson, from left central midfielder to left back or left wing back, and they made a back five. Arsenal did it in different ways. So Declan Rice dropped and he essentially became an extra centre back. And there were also other times when they were able to shift other players in and make it a back five. So I think that's a very effective strategy against Spurs. It essentially nullifies any issues that happen in the last line in terms of giving Spurs any space. So that would be a great way to go. It also helps your wide centre backs follow the runs from Poro or the wing back, those underlapping runs. So it has multiple benefits. The only issue is I don't think we can emulate that because we don't have a any other fit central midfielders, senior central midfielders, may I add, apart from Conor Gallagher, Moses Caicedo, and Cesare Casade. So I don't know if you suddenly change strategy and figure out how to do it, but yeah, I don't see how we can go to a back five without a central midfielder, unless you make Madueke or Mudryk do wing back shifts. But I don't think either of them has the selflessness, the aptitude at this point to slot in. Palmer, definitely, you wouldn't want doing those kinds of shifts because you want him, to continue his gold rush in front of goal. But yeah, I think it would have been a strategy that 100% yielded some kind of results in blunting them in an attacking sense. And that's important, Dan, because that's what Spurs' strategy has been under Postecoglou. The fact that they want to score three because they don't trust their defense. So if you manage to keep them at one and you're able to exploit them in transition and grab two or three goals, which they concede a lot, I think that's where the match could be won. So the focus for me would be blunting their attack because I think the defense will yield nonetheless. So if Poch has a game plan, it's focus on the attackers, cut space in the middle, and if possible, go to a back five. At some point in time, you have to try and figure out how to nullify that front five. If you're able to do that, then there's an advantage to be had.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point in the Mudryk and Madueke maybe being a little too selfish at this point in terms of how they've played. And I know that we've talked a little, maybe ad nauseum at this point, on the challenges of putting together an attack that can do a job against a any type of Premier League defense at the moment, other than Nico Jackson converting the most difficult chances and struggling with the easy ones. Cole Palmer being a little injured and trying to get back into a situation where he's continuing to find goodness and not being the sole creative output, creative engine for this team, and looking for those on the fringe to be supportive. Maybe from your thought, just is do we already now have enough data heading into the summer that we're at a point where there's an you would be willing to say we're ready to go add or reinforce in this area of the pitch to find another senior attacker, not a striker, which we talked about previously, to improve the distribution of goals? Or is there a second season under, either under Pochettino or potentially a season under a new manager where one of those two or both of those two could come good in your mind?
Yeah, in an ideal scenario, the wide attackers, I do think their fate depends on what the managerial situation looks like. I mean, if we get somebody like an Amarin, then I fear for Madueke and Mudrik because he's not very big on out and out wingers. So if you look at Amarim's setup, one player that does play the wings, Jenny Catamo, is playing wing back. And all the others, Trincao, Gonsalves, everybody is playing in the half space. Even Marcus Edwards, who's played under Poch, also likes playing out wide and coming inside. He's also shifted to an inside role. So if it's going to be wingers, then I think it's going to be an interesting question, especially because Omari Hutchinson is also putting in some incredible performances out on loan. And the switch, Dan, between the championship and the PL is not as big as it seems. I think there are a lot of players who've made the switch from there to now very, very effectively. I mean, Jared Bowen obviously took a lot of years, and from Hull he came and just, absolutely demolished all expectations that were on him from coming from the championship. Very lately, if you've watched a player called Adam Wharton, we were linked with him before he moved from Blackburn to Crystal Palace. He's been one of the standout young players in the PL. So, yeah, you can look anywhere. Palace have multiple examples. Michael Olise came from, I think, Reading, and had a loan spell there and just absolutely brilliant after he came back. So, yeah, I mean, I think you should definitely be giving that some heavy consideration. You should have Omari Hutchinson firmly penciled in as tryout for preseason. Obviously, the biggest, easiest decision that you can make is give him, you know, hopefully, if Ipswich do get promoted, then a season in the PL to develop, like Levi Colville, just having that experience of getting game time in and out, which he will 100% get at Ipswich if they get promoted. So that would be the ideal situation. But I also think that if we didn't spend heavily on Mudrik and Madueke, a loan for both of them at teams where they would have played week in, week out would have helped. I was listening to the review pod that you and Nick were doing, and you talked about a little bit of selfishness, a little bit of not passing to options. And I think that happens when players know they have limited time, and they're not secure in their positions. Madueke has completed 190 this entire season. He's completed 490s since the 2021 season. He's not had any game time away from the Eredivisie. So obviously, when he does get the time, he wants to hold on to the ball, have 8 or 9 dribbles and score. That's his way of ensuring that he gets to be in the side next time. Mudrik's the same. Why does he dribble at 3 defenders? Because he's anxious, because he's going to definitely lose his spot to, say, a Sterling or a Chukwuemeka or an Nkunku, which has happened multiple times. I mean, he lost his position to Ben Chilwell. So um, that plays on your mind as a young attacker. What's going to happen next? Am I secure? So there needs to be some kind of stability. There needs to be some kind of security. So the question then becomes, if you send them out on loan, how are they going to react? And if you keep them here, what's going to be the equation when Carney Chukwuemeka and Nkunku are fit? Which guys will play week in, week out, and how does that affect squad harmony, and how does that affect their personal trajectory? So important decisions to be made then, but that's the read of the situation. I think Carney will be very important when he comes back, because I think how Poch wanted to play in preseason hasn't been possible because the two guys meant to make the structure work both got injured. So even if he's not around, those are two very, very good attackers who are able to offer great value in central positions. So I expect them to offer a heavy distribution of goals and assists, especially in Kunku if he's 100% fit.
Yeah, the redo of this season with a simulation where not every single member of the team gets injured for a period of time is quite the theory crafting that could happen at some point in the future. But I think any other final thoughts as we round out this preview episode, as we try to build a little positivity, a little bit of optimism for the listener, for the viewer on what could transpire. I mean, Chelsea win, they end up advancing up the table. They spoil Tottenham Hotspur's dreams at that point of, because they do have 2 games in hand on Aston Villa right now. So if they won both of those, they'd be 1 point off of a Champions League spot. If they lose this one, more and more likely that they will not be able to catch up to Aston Villa. That's a win for us. And, I guess villains will be appreciative of that too. A win for us, gets us into a situation where we're on 51 points. We would jump West Ham. We'd be on 34 matches played. They're on 35. So it'd be still a couple points off of Newcastle and Man United as we look at trying to get back into the 6th position, potentially make the Europa League happen. Yeah, I mean, any positivity you want to try to paint here, or are you still just at the point where you want to hold off any emotional attachment because you don't want to get hurt again, the way that Chelsea have seemed to do time and time again this season? After a high, there's a low, and there is no in between.
Unfortunately, I am the perennial slash eternal optimist, so I do have dreams and hopes which I am completely ready to have shattered. But I would say a golden boot for Cole Palmer, like that for me should be the collective objective. Even in, a season that's not gone well, if one of your young players in his first proper debut season ends up emerging and trumping Erling Haaland and Mohamed Salah, imagine the kind of confidence it gives to that young guy going forward. And I think, it's an individual thing, but if you're able to elevate yourselves and make sure that there's a selfless objective to be had for the betterment of the team, then that's one you should 100% be looking at. Obviously, spoiling a Spurs party is, a Chelsea special, so we should be looking to do that as well. But like you mentioned, there's still, I mean, in a very bizarre way, at a time when everybody around us is incredibly porous defensively, unpredictable. Nobody wants the Conference League. There's still a chance that we sneak in. I don't trust United. I know that they still have a couple of big games left to play. So there's every chance that you catch up with them and trump them. This should be the objective. There's no other way for me to see it because there are not many games left. So give it your best. Make sure that your individuals get the plaudits they deserve, and stop fighting over penalties. Give it to Palmer. Simple. And hopefully, I mean, I know Nico has come under a lot of fire, but man, like the difference that he's made from game one to now, I have so much hope, and I will keep beating this drum despite all the flack that it brings. But there is an incredible player in there. Ian Wright, an exceptional centre forward in his day, said the same thing, saying, he might not be getting his final touch right, his finishing boots on, but everything else that he's doing, excellent as a centre forward. So get him as many goals as possible. Give him an opportunity to shoot 4 or 5 times a game, and at least your attack comes out looking very well set for next season. Defensively, obviously we can improve, but if there's confidence there for your attackers, then there's every chance that you have a good foundation to build for next season.
Well, that is the optimism we're going to paint at the end of this episode, but we will be back after Chelsea hopefully get a result against Spurs, pick up some points, advance up the table, and do the thing that we just hope that they do, and that's beat Tottenham, because losing to Tottenham, drawing against Tottenham, never feels great. But that's going to do for this episode. So until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.